This is Chapter 5, Lesson 7, Distance on the Coordinate Plane. You can use the Pythagorean theorem to find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane. So, for number 1, I can graph the ordered pair, 3, 0 and 7, -5, then find the distance c between the 2 points. Round to the nearest tenth. So I have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So here are my 2 points, right? They form a right triangle. So one of my legs is 4, the other one is 5. So 4 squared plus 5 squared equals c squared. 4 squared is 16, 5 squared is 25, and I add them together, I get 41. 41 equals c squared. Then I can square root both sides, so I get plus or minus 6.4, which is c. So the points are about 6.4 units apart. You can also use the blank blank to find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane. In those 2 blanks, you're going to write distance formula. So you can use the distance formula to find the distance between 2 points on the coordinate plane. Okay, so if we're deriving and using the distance formula. So deriving just means that we're figuring out what the distance formula actually is. So I can solve for D, right? So A, because that's my run, and that's my x values, I can take where x2 is and subtract it from x1 is, and that gives me the distance for A. I can do the same thing for B. B is my rise, which is what y stands for on my points. So I take my 2 y's and I subtract them. Because here's my top point, here's my bottom point. That tells me the distance it's traveled. So x squared, or x2 minus x1, and y2 minus y1. Okay, we know that a squared plus b squared equals d squared, which is or c squared normally, but d squared in this case. Okay, so d squared equals x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay, let's look at example number 2. On the map, each unit represents 45 miles. West Point, New York is located at 1.5, 2, and Annapolis, Maryland is located at -1.5, -1.5. What is the approximate distance between West Point and Annapolis? So here's Annapolis. Here's West Point. Okay. So method 1 is to use the Pythagorean theorem. So I have to figure out the triangle. So there's my triangle. This is 3 units down and 3.5 units over. Okay? So I let C represent the distance between West Point and Annapolis. Then A equals 3 and B equals 3.5. So my formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. 3 squared plus 3.5 squared equals c squared. 3 squared is 9. 3.5 squared is 12.25. When I add them together, I get 21.25. And I square root both sides, and I get 4.6. Okay, so that's one way to do it. That's using the Pythagorean theorem. The other way I can do it is using the distance formula. So I let x1, y1 be my first coordinate point, 1.5, comma 2, and x2, y2 be my second coordinate point, negative 1.5, comma negative 1.5. Okay, so I take my x values and subtract them, and my y values and I subtract them. So here's x2 minus x1, y2 minus y1. x2, negative 1.5 minus x1, 1.5, gives me 3, negative 3. And then my y2 and y1, negative 1.5 minus 2, gives me negative 3.5. I square both of those, so I get 9 plus 12.25. Add them together, so I get 21.25. Take the square root, so I get 4.6. So either method, since each map unit equals 45 miles, the distance between the cities is 4.6 times 45, or about 207 miles. Okay. Notice whichever method I use, I will still get the same answer for C. Okay. So this is what is commonly known as the distance formula. D, distance, equals the square root of the quantity x2 minus x1 squared plus the quantity y2 minus y1 squared. Okay. So there are two problems. I want you to go ahead, pause the video, try them out, and when you're done, we will go over the answers together. All right, now that you've had a chance to try out the try-it problems, let's go over the answers together. Letter A says graph the ordered pairs 1, 3 and negative 2, 4. Then find the distance C between the 2 points. Round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So the first thing that I want to do is actually graph these 2 points. So my first point is 1, 3. And my second point is negative 2, 4. Okay. So they form this triangle. And it is a right triangle. So I went up 1 unit and I went over 3 units. Okay, so I'm going to take a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So I have 1 squared plus 3 squared. 1 plus 9 equals c squared, so 10 equals c squared. Square root of 10 is 3.2 approximately. Okay, so I can either use the Pythagorean theorem or I can use the distance formula. So that's what the Pythagorean theorem, and I'll show you how to do it with the distance formula. So D equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. Okay. So D equals the square root of negative 2 minus 1 squared plus 4 minus 3 squared. So this is negative 3 squared plus 1 squared. So it's 9 plus 1, which is the square root of 10, which is approximately 3.2. Okay. Either way, you still get the same answer. Letter B, Cromwell Field is located at 2.5, 3.5, and Dedeaux Field at 1.5, 4.5 on a map. If each map unit is 0.1 mile, about how far apart are the fields? So the first step I'm going to do is find the distance. And I'm going to go ahead and use the distance formula. So I have 1.5 minus 2.5 squared plus 4.5 minus 3.5 squared. So D equals -1 squared plus 1 squared. 1 plus 1, D is the square root of 2, which is approximately 1.4. Okay. But it said each map unit is 0.1 mile. About how far apart are the fields? So I'm going to take this distance, 1.4, because remember it's on a map, so it's a little bit smaller. And I'm going to multiply it by whatever the distance is, which in this case is 0.1. And when I do that, this gives me approximately 0.14 miles. So Cromwell and Dedeaux Field are about 1.4 miles apart. And that is the end of lesson 7.